but first it's been revealed. The Australian energy market operator has advised the government there would be no risk for the energy grid if the giant Eraring power station was shut down. However, this report is directly contradicted by forecasts 2 weeks earlier that predicted a greater risk of rollouts, of blackouts, because of the shortage in the grid if the New South Wales power station was to close. Joining me now to discuss the detail here, Centre for Independent Studies Director of Energy Research, Aidan Morrison. Well, you've raised this contradiction in research with the regulator. Have they responded? How have they responded?
No, it doesn't appear there's much of a response so far. We've put in a submission highlighting this as a big discrepancy. It goes to the heart of whether the energy transition is actually on track. And in the article today, we can see that they've just claimed there is a technical different purpose and said that nothing to be seen here. So there is clearly something to be seen here. So I think there is no excuse so far for what we've seen is different contradictory reports coming from the same organisation.
And remind people at home how important Eraring is to our energy supply in this country.
Eraring is the largest single coal-fired power station, so it's got about 2.8 gigawatts of capacity, 4 different units of about 700 megawatts each, and so that supplies a very significant share, probably about a third of the coal-fired power station capacity we have, and so it's the biggest single piece of our energy security we have in this state.
So any discrepancy about Eraring is absolutely front-page news.
It certainly is. This is the biggest asset, the most important asset. It's the first one scheduled to retire. So if we don't get Eraring right, we've got nothing seriously right about our modelling and planning.
I think we've got a graph we can put on the screen in a moment. I want you to talk viewers through what this graph tells them and how they should interpret it. There it is on the screen.
Great. This graph shows 3 different simulations the market operator has done. And you can see on the right-hand side of the first 2 plots there, you can see this red line, which is New South Wales, shooting up into the top right-hand corner above the 2 horizontal lines. That shows huge breaches of the reliability standard. So the highest point on that chart there is about 1,000 times the interim reliability measure that we have in force. We'd be talking about an hour per week of blackouts in New South Wales for the whole state blacked out if we were to realise that particular expectation. So these are huge blackouts. And the final different row there, where there's nothing that goes above that, those horizontal lines.
The one right down at the bottom?
Down at the bottom. That's the simulation they ran the day after the Eraring power station announced that it would extend. And so they'd been sitting on these simulations for months and months and months, showing there'd be huge blackouts again and again, simulation after simulation, and they crank the handle again the day after Eraring announced it extends, and it's all gone. And it seems as though they'd hoped that no one would notice that they had a huge critical problem, while saying to the whole community that we had enough energy in the system. The opposite is true, according to this analysis they're producing.
What does the modelling suggest to us about the renewables rollout?
It suggests to us clearly that it's not going at anything like the pace that was planned. And that's the real contradiction here, because the market operator back in August and then updated in October produced a report called the Energy Statement of Opportunities. And its news was that things are going okay, that this time around, this year, we have enough energy in the system to replace Eraring when it closes in 27. And there was only technicalities around security that might cause a minor extension. But actually, we've got nothing like enough energy to replace Eraring when it closes, which intuitively we know because the pipeline is basically empty. There's not much more grid-scale energy projects that are reaching financial close. Lots signing applications and putting in planning applications, but not actually putting their money down and proceeding to construction. So it seems that this is what we all intuitively expected, that coal basically fires New South Wales overnight almost every night, and without these big power stations, we'd have blackouts.
Chris Bowen's announced a review of the governance arrangements for the regulator, for AEMO. What's behind that review, and what do you want to see come out of the review?
Well, that review was a recommendation of a Senate inquiry that was set up in the previous year. And so I think it's absolutely high time that we did have AEMO undergo a governance review. The massive question that has to be asked here is AEMO still meant to be serving consumers, all right, which is what the rules and statutes say, they're meant to be serving the interests of consumers, or are they simply serving the interest of politicians and the ministers? Because it seems as though we have this huge planning system. The idea was the experts would determine what's best in consumers' interests and the ministers would follow some of that expert advice. The opposite is now happening, where fanciful goals like reaching 82% renewables by 2030 or closing Eraring in 25, as Matt Keaton thought was possible, or 27, they're being hard-coded into this report which is actually letting us all assume that something expert and credible and analysing the merit of these proposals has happened, when actually it's not. It's simply pure political targets that have been basically dressed up to look as though the experts produced them.
Isn't this, though, where the rubber hits the road between political aspirations and the politicking of Matt Kean and Chris Bowen and the job of a regulator, which is to be independent? But it feels like there's been a bastardisation in that relationship.
It's been catastrophically bastardised, and you can see this in the campaign that Chris Bowen ran. His primary theme in saying that Trust Me on Energy was about, I'm with the experts. The experts came up with this plan. It's an expert plan. And he used that directly, even in debates, in the election campaign against his opponent, and held up these reports, such as the Integrated System Plan, and said, look, this is the expert analysis that backs our plan. But we actually know, if you listen carefully, the experts have told us, no, we didn't come up with this plan. We first assumed that all government policy was achievable and is achieved in this plan, without casting any effort to assess the merits of how feasible, let alone how cost-effective that plan actually is. So we've been told we have an expert plan. In fact, actually, the experts have just been dressing up and disguising the politicians' plans as coming from experts. And I think that's a tragedy, and it needs to be addressed in the governance review.
Good on you, Aidan. Good on you for digging into the detail. Thank goodness we've got you on the team. Thank you.